there's a group in the UK. There's a rejuvenation of the National Party of Germany, and they are now happily waving swastikas in German public areas without police intervention, even though it's supposed to be against the law. It's supposed to be hate speech. I thought we all agreed on that one. So there's a lot of anti-Semitism happening throughout the world, and there's a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric going on. And at least in Europe, it's usually tied with hatred against the Roma, the Gypsies. It's also tied with hatred against migrants from North Africa and Turkey, who are and people that are of descent who are who live in Europe now or who are Europeans. And so my sense is that we have to have an analysis of anti-Semitism that links it with these other forms of racism and xenophobia, and that we need a comprehensive approach so that all of those forms of racism are unacceptable. So you tell me somebody on this campus engages in anti-Semitic rhetoric, I'm prepared to believe you. I kind of want to know what it is, because, you know, unfortunately, sometimes if you say something like Israeli Jews and Palestinians should live together on the basis of equality and they should be equal citizens, you're considered to be anti-Zionist and pro-Palestinian, and you're understood even to be anti-Semitic because you are calling into question the contemporary way in which the state of Israel is legitimated. And if you raise a critical question about that legitimation, you can be called anti-Semitic. Now, what I worry about more than anything else is that what I would call nefarious allegation of anti-Semitism is getting in the way of our actually dealing with the fact that we're seeing fascism on the move again. And just as German fascism took the Jews, it also took the Gypsies, and it took the communists, and it took the disabled, and it took all kinds of, and the gay people. I mean, let's remember there are complex communities that are being affected by these kinds of massive right-wing organizations. And I think we need to study them, and we need to think carefully, what do we call anti-Semitic and why? And when do we need to say that person's racist speech is not acceptable on this campus? That's a big open question. If I were an administrator today, I would be having a big headache around that. Right? What's free speech? What's offensive? What's actually hard to hear but necessary to hear if you're going to be an informed person in the world? Sometimes you have to hear the anger that another person has in order to be informed about why it is that a particular viewpoint is so passionately held. I don't think you can quash all that with civility. I think I myself was just astonishingly civil today. But I'm not always civil. I try to stay away from name calling if I can. But I've called names. You know, I'm completely committed to nonviolent politics. It makes me a very naive political thinker, and yet, you know, people say, oh, she belongs to Hamas or something. It's like crazy, right? Never supported Hamas. I have only supported nonviolent movements towards greater democratization. So we need to be careful. We need not to be swept up in panic, right? In political panic. That person's going to say something that's very disturbing to me, therefore shut them up. Let's hear it, and if you don't agree with it, listen carefully, because you will need a chance to make a better argument. Right? And demand equal time, and get your equal time, and come back. You know, that's got to be the way it is. But, you know, even something like pro-Palestinian, you know, it's funny. It always makes me, it sounds a little bit like a soccer game, like being pro-Manchester, you know, or Barca, you know? Like, it's not a game, there's not two sides. This is a field of conflict with many different positions. And many different positions within Palestine and in the Palestinian diaspora, among Jews, just astonishing positions within Israel and outside. The fastest growing Jewish organization in the United States is Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace, which allows for the most open critical dialogue on Israel. That's growing faster than AIPAC. That's growing faster than the American Jewish Committee. So where are the sides? Where are the sides? I don't think there are two sides. You know, maybe this binarism that Uber had was a little too reductive, and we also need to understand, especially if you think about the demographics of the area, think about the demographics of Israel. I just suggested to you that 50% of them are non-white. I didn't know he was that. Think about the demographics of Palestine, right? Which would include the expelled and the dispossessed. Like, how do you begin to understand that cultural diversity? And about fights they have, my God, about states, you know, about the Palestinian Authority, about PBF, no good fights. Well, some people. Okay, but you know, allow all of these populations to be complex and to be on their way and be revising their views and not always having one view. Right? There's not one view that is Israel. Even Netanyahu doesn't enjoy the popular consensus of Israel at this moment. So perhaps we need to attend a little bit more carefully to these matters.
Okay, I want to come back to the question of coexistence and cohabitation, because you mainly traced the history of settler colonialism and discussed it in relation to that. I would like you to address perhaps your thoughts on how do you imagine the cohabitation in the immediate aftermath of such a deep history of violence in which with two people are involved that both have an experience of a history of genocidal politics and unequally so in the present. I'm thinking, for example, of Dan Barron's work, where he had these groups with Jewish and German participants and said he could come very easily to a breakthrough and to a very productive exchange. But in the similar groups that he tried to do with Israeli and Palestinian participants, despite of the real multiplicity of the Israeli voices, there was a complete impasse because the history of violence is ongoing, and in that immediate moment, neither party could come up with a viable, sustainable vision of cohabitation. How do we address, what are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I do have some thoughts there. I mean, let me say this, that, I mean, one of the problems with, I mean, I'm very moved by them, like the bereavement groups and the Seeds for Peace, these groups that try to bring Palestinian and Israeli students together and youth together, or families who are in bereavement together to talk and through translators or perhaps through compulsory English, which is a problem. You know, try to establish modes of understanding on that basis. And I think that those are not, for all their virtues, and they do have them, I think that that's a very different model because, for instance, Seeds for Peace says we're not going to talk about power, we're not going to talk about politics, we're all going to speak in English because it's neutral. Well, actually, who has access to English? Whose schooling gives them, you know, that kind of fluency in English? And what does it mean not to be able to talk about power or structural problems, but to make it seem like it's all a question of interpersonal understanding? That means that people can't actually talk about what happens at the checkpoint or what kinds of deep political, military subjugation they live in throughout their lives. And neither would the Israelis talk about their complicity or indeed their position in relationship to these broader political issues. So I worry about that as a model. I think not much can happen there. There's some beautiful stories that come out of the bereavement groups, and I accept that. But this is what I think. I think if you look at the coalitions that have emerged to stop housing demolitions, which includes Israelis and Palestinians, if you look at the coalitions that have emerged to stop the wall from going through villages, the coalitions that have emerged to stop the destruction of olive trees, the coalitions that have emerged to try to lend support to people in Palestine who are indefinitely detained, so prisoner solidarity networks. These are just a few, or the coalitions that have emerged at the checkpoints between Israelis and Palestinians to help get people through without harassment. Like, those are actual activist coalitions that are in solidarity against the ruling authorities, against militarization, and in those contexts, the broader object of political critique allows for a sense of solidarity that I think allows for what I'm trying to call cohabitation. And they're very, very different from these interpersonal groups where politics is suspended and English is imposed. They're very, very different. If you are working together, and there's some very moving, important kinds of things, but I think solidarity, forms of solidarity are the form, or give us the kernel of cohabitation that I'm looking for.
Actually, you have mentioned groups that was only a big example for what would, but how would the cohabitation deal with people not having to work together on the same
Yes.
after?
Yes, I understand that, but I also think that people can come together who have suffered enormous losses and develop certain kinds of alliances through loss. I mean, I do think that's right, and antagonisms too. And also, you don't have to love your neighbor to agree to live with them and to respect their absolute right to life. Otherwise, I don't agree with my friend Michael Hart and the love thing. I just don't think people have to love each other. They can hate each other, they can have really profound, long-lasting antagonisms, but live in a political structure that grants equal rights and rights to continuing existence and rights against dispossession and rights against violence. You can do that. That's possible. Maybe it breaks down, through different kinds of reparation practices. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, we've seen it in South Africa. There are limited kinds of success for those modalities. But I don't think we should imagine a world in which antagonism is relinquished. I think what we all have to do is live with antagonism and accept that the world is given to all of us, and so we must find a way of living on the condition of equality together in some political structure.
Maybe we can take 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just wanted to ask a question from a human rights law background, because I've lectured extensively in the Middle East, and this always comes up as a topic, whose right to be there, etc. And I try to present it in a way that binationalism is what keeps both in check in a one-state solution, and that there's an ethical relationship between humans. To touch upon what you were saying, I keep on running into a very simplistic rhetoric, in my opinion, when I discuss what's happening. And the question stays at, from the different perspectives, they say, I can be there because historically I was there first. Nobody can prove that, none of us were there. Or I can be there because religiously I'm promised this land. Nobody can prove that, none of us have died and come back. All right? Or we deal with it post-hoc, all right, after this happens, what do we do with the refugees from here or the refugees from there, and then the discussion of the diaspora. Little discussion about how do we coexist now, which is what you're touching upon. So to get into the messy question on what grounds constitute legitimacy, how can I explain this in terms of human rights law, bless you? How can I say, oh, under the law of peace, there's a large group of people moving from one place to another, and that's okay. Or how can I explain it in terms of the law of war, which is there's a large group of people that beat another group of people, and the law of war states that when one group beats another group, they rightfully stay, which is what happens in all wars. So, to ask the question, under what framework can this be presented such that someone in the Middle East can make peace with how and why this happened, such that he can start believing in a structure that protects him so that he doesn't have these hatreds? Because I think in the Middle East, structure comes first.
Okay, so in the two trajectories I laid out in the beginning, we could sort of organically build up to structure, or we would demand structural change first, and then maybe we see how we go on. You would be one of the planners of the structural change. You would position yourself as a human rights law person who's trying to think about what structural change needs to take place so that cohabitation can get realized.
Exactly. Let's legitimize this so we can.
Yeah, well,